I had never bought anything off of eBay before, but I was in a phase where I would get reminiscences of everything of all the old TV shows I grew up on. So I began securing the internet through certain things that could give me the nostalgic feeling. I happened to stumble upon a user was selling an unreleased episode of an old show that aired on the Family Channel called The Weekenders on a CD for only $7. I was slightly curious about the low price and just figured that it was just because he didn't want it. I am a television enthusiast, so this was an exciting moment for me. Being able to see the episode of that hadn't been released or has seen by anyone else other than the person who was selling it. I would watch it when I was 11 or so, every morning before school. The disc finally arrived and it came in one of those blank CD cases. I was hoping I didn't get gypped, but the disc had a label on it, in written black letters on somewhat worn out of the label, kind of like a brown tinge. It said dismissed. I thought in my head that it might have been was just unreleased, that it hadn't been dismissed, so I didn't give much thought to it. It was just getting dark outside. My living room had a dark blue hue to it, as the sun was almost down. My parents were at work and my brother was asleep, so I popped the disc into my disc player on my TV and waited. The player usually worked for quite quickly, and surprised, it didn't start too quickly. While the disc was $7, you get what you paid for, I was sitting on my couch directly in front of the TV, just looking at the black screen. It faded to a frame that was only a brief moment. I thought I missed something, so I rewinded. I went back to the scene and paused. It was the Bahabay News lady from the headline covered with a black box with a blurry picture of what looked like a blue and red object in a plastic bag, next to a yellow card that had a red X on it. I felt rather puzzled on what I was looking at, but I had to proceed to watch the rest. The theme song played as normal and felt a sense of nostalgia ran as characters' name title cards came up. Carver, Lore, Tish, and I was shocked to find that Tino was missing. The three characters danced in front of the white card without Tino. I just figured this episode was pulled from a mishap by the artists or something. The word Friday came up on the screen, and I saw four of the characters, including Tino, walking across a beach backdrop. They were talking about Chloe Monte's latest incident. A fridge magnet got stuck to her braces. I and the characters had a good laugh. My living room was completely dark by now, and I was relaxed into my couch. I watched on as they went to the mall, and by a costume store, they all went in and showed Lori and Tish trying to find funny-looking hats. Tino was walking up to the aisles looking at the capes. He was feeling a material one in particular, and was too indulged on to notice Carver sneaking up behind him. Carver then jumped at Tino wearing a clown mask with black paint around its eyes and had a big red nose and a smile. Tino jumped out of his skin and fell to the floor in a fetal position. As assumed, they all laughed at his reaction. Just looking at him, the shot panned to Tino's face as his eyes closed as a tear ran down his cheek. Sobbing under his breath, he and his friends continued to laugh. He hopped up and off and ran. I found this unusual because I was outraged with the fact they would laugh at him while he was in tears. As Tino ran, the sky turned grayer and darker, running home with tears running down his face. This seemed very grim for a Weekenders episode. He opened the door to his house when the lights weren't on, but he could see his mom passed out on the couch. He walks over to her and touches her shoulder to see his mother's face. A deafening scream took over my speakers. I scrambled frantically to turn down the volume. The image became more detailed as his mother, deceased blood, was running down from her gash on her cheek. Her eyes were popped out of their head, almost looking like they were staring at the viewer. Her hair was frazzled and discolored. Tino then backed off as his mother's body fell violently at his feet. I was clutching onto my couch cushion. Tino ran upstairs and slammed his door, then sat his back down to it. As the TV went silent, at first I thought I accidentally hit the mute button, but the volume was up. Tino sat quietly at the door, staring at the wall for about 3 minutes. He stood up and walked over to his dresser, but there was a pill bottle. He tossed it at the wall violently before taking off his shirt. He opened up the drawer to find a blue knife in a green box and looked at the mirror. He slammed it onto the table and he broke the fourth wall by staring into the camera. Kind of the unusual twist for the unusual episode. He stared at me for a good minute and a half, just a blank stare, not blinking. His eyes widened and what looks like a creep smile was on his face as he walked closer and then said, "You want me to do it, don't you?" Very loudly. It sounded so real, like if he was sitting next to me, yelling in my ear. He smiled at me for a few moments as he flicked the knife and put it to his face. I was dumbfounded by the fear. I couldn't move. He dug the blade into his eyelid and dark lead liquid ran down his face. His screams were high-pitched and nothing I ever heard before. He dug the blade into his eyelids as liquid ran down his face and onto his chest. He screamed once again as he dug it more. I could hear the blade going in. He proceeded to do something really messed up to the sides of his mouth. The effects that it showed seemed greater, more realistic than before. I watched as the blood pouring down his face and formed of a face of a clown. His blonde hair was soaked in blood. He ran around the living room, laughing and putting his hands on his face. He fell to the ground. A lot of blood was coming out of his nose, and he felt his head rested on the step of his bed. The floor had a puddle of blood on it, and then it went quiet, until he turned to the camera once again. Tino lifted his head slightly, as his eyes stared down at me. He said with his voice muffled by the blood, "Later days," as his head hit the step, with blood rushing from everywhere. His eyes still open and a grin with his blood-soaked face. He was staring at me, and I waited for the credits to roll, but they never came. I went to turn it off and go back to the menu. I tried pressing the button, but it did not work. He was staring at me with blood rushed through his skull to the floor. I stood up and turned off the TV. My entire room was black, and I was sweating like crazy, frantically trying to find a light. I turned it on and stared at my TV, still off. I unplugged the DVD player and took it off the side, and then I burned my TV net feed again to see the same fate. But Tino, wide-eyed and deceased, now having dry blood on his face, cracking, I felt tears in the back of my eyes for some reason. As I turned it off again and unplugged the TV in silence, I still waited for my dad to get home. I started having nightmares after I saw it, but since then I had visited therapy. To this day, I don't know what happened, but for some reason every time I turn on that TV, I see his face. No one else sees it but me, but I will always see it. I always see it. Alright, that was definitely something I wasn't really expecting. But anyways, here's the review for Later Days, a Weekender's Lost Episode Creepypasta. My final thoughts on the story. Okay. This story actually looked like it was an original story from what I've seen. Now, this story, I believe, was made in 2014, I believe, or maybe 2013. Not really too sure. But I do have some good things to say, but I do have some bad things to say. Now, for one, I have to say the grammar of this story was, it was good. I'm not going to lie, the grammar of this story was really good, as well as the sentence structuring. I mean, the paragraph structure and all that was pretty good. I mean, the concept of its own self did seem interesting with Tino, going all crazy all of a sudden and ends up doing some really messed up things to himself. I could see that concept being somewhat good, but at the same time, I do have some things that I did not like about this story. And I'm going to be brutally honest. Pardon me. For one, it's cliched. One thing I definitely did notice is because it's cliched, there's unnecessary cliches thrown in there for the sake of throwing it in there. Now, I know this is an older story, but that doesn't excuse the fact that there were too many cliches that were going on in this story. Now, I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be explaining why that happens or what was going on. But I am going to sit here and say this. One cliche I did spot was the eBay cliche. I mean, many creepypastas have sat there and done, people buying DVDs, CDs, or even VHS's cliches on eBay. I mean, like, it's saying, like, it's the Weekenders for unreleased episode. I'm like, come on. Like, I mean, other creepypastas have done this story. Like, I'm not gonna lie. There's plenty of other creepypastas that done that one as well, done that cliche and trope. I mean, as well as, hyperrealistic blood. Like, I mean, there was hyperrealistic blood and gore in there. I'm like, oh my god, are you serious right now? I mean, I could just definitely say that right now, but, although it's a pretty short story, I'm just gonna definitely say that. But, I mean, I just wasn't really a big fan of this story when I first took a look at this. I mean, besides the fact that it's cliched, I know it had some gory good details about it and the way that the person managed to make it work and all, but there's no reason what caused Tino to sit there and do what he did to himself. There's absolutely no reason for that. I mean, and having the person having to, unplug, the TV and that, I mean, like, come on, like this protagonist is such a chicken at this point, being afraid of a certain lost episode. I mean, like, come on, like, I mean, I've seen other creepypastas do that. Like, why is it that the protagonist sat there and do this in the story? I mean, that doesn't make your story scary. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work with stories anymore, creepypastas anymore. This is actually one of the reasons why creepypastas nowadays just lack originality. I mean, this one did somewhat manage to try to come up with something different, but in this case, though, the story just didn't work, and that's me being honest. I mean, the ending of it wasn't really that satisfying. I'm just gonna state that now. It wasn't really that satisfying to an extent. Like, the one thing I have to say that it was not very satisfying was the fact that the protagonist ended up having nightmares after it, had to visit therapy. I'm like, what the hell is that even, have to do with the episode? Like, I mean, yeah, the episode could be, unsettling and all, but do you really have to sit there and add the trope where, first somebody goes to therapy or get nightmares every time they see it? Like, oh, come on. Like, I mean, that's been done too many times to creepypastas, but I'm like, these cliches are, like, overused, and I'm just getting tired of, these. But I mean, the fact that the story, has the ending saying, every time I turn on that TV, I see his face, no one does but me. I'm like, okay, really? I mean, why add that? Like, why add that in a story? It doesn't work. And I'm gonna be honest right here, right now. I remember hearing Dave's narration of this back in 2020, which was last year. But I decided, you know what, I'm gonna give it a go at this story and give it a shot. I mean, the story did have somewhat of a potential to be a good one, but it failed. I mean, it was not that great because it was like your typical lost episode creepypasta cliche. I mean, the story could have been, better if the cliches were taken out. Then the story would have had an interesting or decent concept. But at this point, though, it just doesn't work. That's my honest opinion. Now, I don't know why this one got popular. I'm surprised that nobody really narrated this story. But I'm sitting here and doing it because, well, I found this on the regular Creepypasta Wiki. And, I'm not a crazy fan of the story. I don't really care for it. I mean, if you guys like this story, that's fine. I don't have a problem with it. Although the story was not bad, but it was not great. I'm definitely saying that. It was very mediocre. Basically, with, whole concept of it being cliched and all. That's the main reason why this story was just not that great. I mean, one thing I could definitely say is that if the author took the cliches out of the story, then the story would have had, an interesting or decent concept. But other than that, the story just didn't work. That's the main reason. Now, I don't know who the original author of this story is, so I'm going to leave it as anonymous for now. If I ever find out who the original author of the story is, I'll be sure to give him or her proper credit. But as of now, I'm just going to leave this as anonymous. But yeah, this is on the regular Creepypasta Wiki in case if you guys want to check it out. But anyways, I'm going to sit here and say this right now. This is just simply my own personal opinion. You happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions in regards to these creepypastas. Simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of the story would have to be a... To be honest, I'm just going to give this one a 4 out of 10. Giving it a 4 because it did have somewhat of an interesting concept. If it weren't for the cliches and if it weren't for, unnecessary blood and gore and all that, and if the cliches were not taken out or maybe make it more believable so it doesn't seem your typical Lost Episode pasta, then that I would be fine with, but unfortunately that's not the case with this story. But other than that, I don't really care for this story. It's not bad, but it's not great either. So I'm giving this one a 4 out of 10, just for that reason. I mean, it did have potential to be good, but unfortunately, that's not the case with this story. I don't even know why it's still on the regular Creepypasta Wiki. I still don't know why it's still on there. But, you know what? I'm not going to question too much of that. Anyways, what did you guys think about this story? Did you all enjoy it? Did you all not? Also, what we have done personally to help make this story a lot better? Feel free to leave me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you're new to my channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell when I upload so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out and I have to go get my brain fixed.